everybody. Welcome to the new Evolve at LinkedIn virtual series. I'm your host, Amber Naslund. This is a new series we've done here at LinkedIn to bring you thought starters around transforming your brand, your business, and even yourselves as marketing professionals in what is kind of a topsy-turvy world right now. I am so excited today to bring you a discussion around thought leadership. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I have a couple of fabulous guests from Accenture who are going to blow your mind with some of the things that they are doing as a company, but also the things that they've learned as individuals and professionals about how to tackle this daunting topic for your business. So before we dive into that, I have a few housekeeping items that we're going to go through just to make sure you know how we're going to run things today. First of all, you'll get a full recording of this if you're registered for the event, and you'll get a few additional resources sent to you. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about taking frantic notes. The Q&A tool on the side will help you ask questions as we go. I've got plenty of time set aside at the very end of our broadcast today to take some of your questions. But if you have them throughout, feel free to feed them in, and we'll try to answer some of them in line as we go. If you're on social, you can follow the hashtag Evolve by LinkedIn to follow the discussion here on LinkedIn, on Twitter. We'll be posting all throughout the afternoon. And then at the end, don't forget to share with us what you thought of today's event. There'll be a little survey that pops up, especially if you're watching in Slido today. So don't forget to do that because we really want to hear from you about whether this was valuable. What are we going to cover today? First and foremost, obviously, I'm already doing the welcome part, so that's easy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why thought leadership even matters. There is some great research that we've done in partnership with Edelman here at LinkedIn that should shed some light onto why you should care about thought leadership as a brand and a business. And then the best part is that we're going to have a really engaging chat with two people who have really made me more excited about this topic than I ever thought possible. Jill Kramer, who heads up global brand at Accenture, coming to us from the brand and marketing perspective of the role of thought leadership. And then Francis Hinterman heads research globally for Accenture. That's the department that runs all of thought leadership for the company. So he's going to have some really interesting insights for us about how they tackle that. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions, and I'll share a little bit with you after that about the next event in our series. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so first and foremost, why is thought leadership a thing we should care about? And all the time that I have been in marketing, my job here at LinkedIn is that I'm a senior content consultant, which means that I work with some of our top enterprises to understand their content strategy, both on LinkedIn and broader. And thought leadership plays a huge role in how these companies go to market. But a lot of times the question is this a thing that we should be investing in? And it's a question that comes up a lot at LinkedIn. So it's something we delved into in depth with our partners over at Edelman globally. What we did is we ran a survey and we researched about a little over 3,000 business executives from a huge array of different industries and seniorities across the board to ask them a little bit about the value of thought leadership and what makes for good thought leadership content. Because again, it's a question that a lot of people ask and aren't really sure about. So we went straight to the source. These are the people who are making decisions based on thought leadership in their own organizations and the thought leadership they consume. So let's cover a little bit about what we found out. What's really interesting to start with is that more than half of the decision makers that we talked to spent an inordinate amount of time actually consuming and reading thought leadership or watching video, listening, podcasts, but spending a lot of time digesting the information that brands and companies put out into the universe. I always find this really surprising because I don't know about you, but I'm often taxed for time and for space in my days to spend on things like this. And if you look at these numbers, meaningful engagement with thought leadership, people are spending time with this. And I think as marketers, we're really close to that problem and can sometimes either get tired of our own voices and think, why are we doing this? And why are we spending all this time on thought leadership? But it really does have a demonstrable impact on the companies that are looking to this information to help distinguish and delineate between the companies they choose to do business with. So they are spending and investing the time to consume the content that we as marketers produce and put out. So that's good news for us. If you'll notice, there's actually a pretty substantial group of people that spend several hours a week digesting thought leadership content. So it behooves us as brands and marketers to really make sure that we're investing good quality time in what we produce. The other interesting aspect of our research is that it surfaced this very important note. 89% of the decision makers we talked to said that good thought leadership can actually help bolster their overall impression of a brand. That's huge for those of us who are marketers and always trying to understand what we can do to move the needle for how people perceive our company, whether they perceive or prefer to work with us as a brand over somebody else. The way that thought leadership can actually positively drive brand perception is an important correlation for us as marketers to understand. And this is not just every Tom, Dick, and Harry on the planet. This is decision makers who are making meaningful budget and strategic decisions about how to spend their resources as companies. 90% of them said that they increase respect for those companies. And this big box here on trust and perception of capabilities. In such a tumultuous business world right now, being able to not only stand out from peer sets, but also offer people an important point of view about what you're capable of as a brand is a very important differentiator, and thought leadership is an important vehicle for getting that done. So this is the positive impact we can have as a brand. But there's a double-edged sword to thought leadership that I think is important for us. And I'm going to talk to Jill and Francis a little bit about this today. There is a little bit of a gap between how much content exists in the universe on thought leadership and how much of it is actually high-quality content. So these same decision makers that we polled with our survey, only 15% of them said that the thought leadership that they encounter is very good or excellent. It's not great news for us marketers. That means that we have some work to do in the caliber and the quality of the thought leadership we're putting out into the universe. A lot of it's kind of mediocre, and mediocre isn't really what makes for iconic brands. And there's an unfortunate chunk of mediocre to poor that is doing a real disservice, I think, to all of us as an industry, but also as one of those aspects that drags down the perception of thought leadership overall, because we know that it's something that we should invest in, but there's a lot of noise in the market, and it's easy for thought leadership content to slip into that sort of noisy bucket. So we want to try to avoid that. High quality then correlates to higher brand perception. This is important to know too. So when we ask the people who are actually spending those many hours a week consuming this, they can tell the difference between high caliber content and low caliber content. And I should define a little bit of what makes for good thought leadership in their estimation, because it's a question that's like, great, thanks, Amber. We know it should be good. What does good mean? Good in general often means sharing a unique and distinctive perspective or point of view that these decision makers can't get from another source. So it's not just the Me Too content of saying the same thing as other people have said. It's something distinctive, it's something unique, and it's something that has teeth to it. Most of the C-suite executives we talk to actually prefer to have their thinking pushed in a way that helps them see where the market is going or where their business needs to move next, as opposed to reiterating the things or validating the things they already know to be true. So when we look at this research in aggregate, what falls out of that are a few key principles that we're going to focus on today in some of our discussion with Jill and Francis about the commonalities that great thought leadership has together. First and foremost, it usually has clear, what we call at LinkedIn, white space, meaning that it is owning and capturing conversation that is not replicated by other companies within your peer set or the industry at large. There's also a really important factor of relevance, and that probably sounds like basic blocking and tackling, but having thought leadership content that is germane to the things that decision makers are thinking about in that given moment. Are these the challenges that they are focused on? having a vision, and again, setting sights on something about where the industry is going, not necessarily where it is today, but setting a future forward perspective is really important. And I'm also going to ask both of our guests today a little bit about leveraging the subject matters experts in your organization, because Edelman also produces a trust barometer report every year, and increasingly, as we go through very transformational times in business, people are looking to peers and leaders in industry who have this subject matter expertise to lead the conversations. And I know Francis has some thoughts on this, so I can't wait to dig in with him on that. The way I also talk a little bit at LinkedIn about diversifying the delivery of that, and this is something I'm eager to get Accenture's perspective on, because thought leadership content as a whole is sort of an ongoing routine that we have to produce as marketers. So what does it mean to distribute that in a way that gets it into the hands of as many people as possible? And how do we use and leverage multiple modes to make that happen, and make our thought leadership content as diverse as it can possibly be? So you didn't come here to hear me talk this whole time. I want to introduce both of our guests today. I'm super excited to have both Jill Kramer and Francis Hinterman here with us. I'm going to give you a little bit of their official bio information so that I can introduce them properly. Jill Kramer is the global head of brand at Accenture, and after building a career at some of the best ad agencies in the world, she came to Accenture about 4 years ago to bring sort of that inside out perspective to the firm and lead their brand, advertising, social media, and content. So she's going to have a really interesting perspective from a marketing perspective. Then I've got Francis Hinterman with us. He's the head of global research at Accenture, a function that fascinates me because that's the meat of so much of this thought leadership content. That department is dedicated to the production of thought leadership. He's been leading the function for 4 years, and prior to that, he has spent about 20 years throughout different areas of Accenture, Paris, France, specifically where he's hanging out with us today, and recently in New York City. He's also a contributor to Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review, both really heavy-hitting publications. So we've got crack expertise on our side today. So I've got some tough questions for Jill and for Francis. Hi, welcome. Thanks for coming and joining us today. Jill, I'm going to start with you as my guinea pig. So one thing we like to do culturally here at LinkedIn is start with the age-old question of, tell me something that is not in your bio and not on your LinkedIn profile that we need to know about you.
Okay, so I had to double check this because I didn't want to be, disingenuous, but my original career ambition was in the journalism space, and specifically broadcast journalism. And while I was still in college, I worked at a TV station, and I was kind of the person who runs around, desk, manning the assignment desk, pulling, file footage here and there. And I had the opportunity their weekend weather person left, and I had the opportunity to do the weather. And I did that there for, I want to say, like 8 months. I really am not a weather expert by any means, but it was great training for the advertising agency world, where you learn your subject matter and you present it well and you engage with it, and life is good if you do all that. So that's what's not on my LinkedIn profile.
That's amazing. I do this a lot with the clients I work with, and I'm always so surprised by people's little trivia. So I'm so glad to know this little piece of information about you. All right, Francis, it's your turn in the hot seat. Tell me a little bit of something that is not on your LinkedIn profile and that was not in the very fascinating bio I just read about you.
Okay, nearly everything is on the LinkedIn profile, of course, but what is not there is that since the start of the lockdown, I am in the business of inventing bedtime stories every day, which I was not used to that, and preferably with animals and preferably with female superheroes. So that's where I'm getting better at every day now.
That's fantastic. I'm sure this is a tough crowd, man. I feel like the younger kids are the ones who are the toughest critics when it comes to that sort of thing.
I think that means, Amber, we can now expect even more creative writing from Francis on the thought leadership front.
Right? I'm going to be looking for this on your LinkedIn profile officially. So just fair warning for that. Okay. All right, let's get into the meat of this here, because we've already got a ton of questions coming through, so I'm going to keep you guys plenty busy. Jill, I'm going to start with you. I think one of the cruxes of a lot of this is, how does thought leadership, a lot of people I think of thought leadership and brand as synonymous, but I personally think that they are two halves of a whole. So talk to me a little bit about your philosophy for how thought leadership supports brand at Accenture, and why, and how you integrate that into your overall strategy.
Yeah, it depends on the company and the industry you're in. So I've had varying degrees of relationship with thought leadership over my career, but here at Accenture, and it's the most fun I've had by far with thought leadership for many reasons. I'm seeing some of the questions as well that I'll be able to use to answer some of that. But I really think in the case where the idea of making your ideas and your thoughts tangible and real, and being able to articulate them clearly with an endpoint to provoke and to challenge a category around how they might be seeing a function or a technology, is really very core to our brand. So content overall and thought leadership specifically is the hallmark of the brand in our space, because it's where all the brilliant human brains get to kind of bring that their hypotheses to life. And I will tell you, it truly is fun, because Francis and I work regularly across our teams, and seeing those hypotheses, what ideas are out there, what data, the stories that our data is telling us, and where that leads their minds, is really a fascinating thing. So it's a beautiful, probably more creative starting point than you might imagine for many brands, and definitely is for us at Accenture.
Okay, well, you teed me up beautifully then to kick the ball over to you, Francis, because I think there's so many companies I think who would love to have the luxury of having a Francis and a whole department dedicated to research and digging up the insights around this. So talk to me a little bit about, help educate everybody about what your team actually does and its role at Accenture, and then how you are the yin to Jill's yang on the thought leadership front, and how research feeds into that entire beast.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a lot about working with a brand, so working with Jill and a team, of course, and it is as well working with the business leaders, as the intent of thought leadership is to support the development of a brand and to support the development of a business, and the creative tension is there. We call that internally the magic triangle. So that means the business leaders, the marketing executives, and the research executives working together. And that's really the way we try to have an impact with our clients, change their perception of what they should do in the future in order to create value. And very related to what you were mentioning earlier, actually, Amber, it is about really differentiating forward-looking content. And we've got to be extremely rigorous and disciplined to enable to produce something that is really bringing some unique value to our client. And that means that we have to invest in proprietary research. That means we have to underpin that, but some of our unique credentials in the market. And it's really bringing all that together that makes a difference.
So I guess I'll kick this to you, Jill, and then Francis, I'd love your perspective on this as well. But how do you marry the, all of us as marketers have sort of brand imperatives, messages we're trying to get into the market, points of view, value proposition we're trying to articulate about why us versus somebody else. But I think sometimes that might run directly counter to the idea of having clear point of view or forward-looking perspectives. So how do you marry the needs of the brand to tell an important story on behalf of Accenture with the need to also push thinking and offer provocative perspectives in the market? Like, how do those things play together?
I think it's to allow yourself different categories of thought leadership. So there are things we very specifically produce with the intent of being more on the front end of trends and of concepts of the next generation of evolution of topics and technology. And then there's things that are closer into the here and now, but there's still, as Francis said, a unique perspective or knowledge we have that will be truly helpful to our clients. And they're both very valuable. And really, the connective tissue is the business strategy. It's really if you truly know yourself well, you know what you're very good at, you know what you have great experience on, great data on, what you could do that proprietary research on, and carve out these very thoughtful pieces, very helpful pieces that range from closer in to further out. And, the stat you mentioned earlier, Amber, about the time spent, we found that early on as we were working on some media strategy. And it really is, I think, people who are, they might be preparing themselves for a presentation. They might be preparing themselves to establish an RFP or assess an RFP. And they're really going deep and they're looking to learn. And when somebody's in that mindset that they want to learn, they want to become more informed on a subject, if you have the right components and if you're covering an array of perspectives from close in to further out, then you're going to be truly helpful to them.
The point about being helpful and valuable is so important. And this is something, Frances, this is a needle that you're going to have to constantly thread, right? As a researcher, is the balance of being incredibly academic with what you do versus accessible and value added to the people who might be consuming that, which might be not an academic audience. So how do you think about that as a researcher to creating value in an accessible way to your audiences?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and it's one on which we work endlessly, day in, day out, because I don't think there is a magic wand to sort out that. It's more a matter about finding the right balance as we go, and it is a journey, and we all recognize it's a journey, and it's a team's game. On the researcher side, it is absolutely critical that we work with the best research methods, that we follow the guidelines which are out there in the market in terms of research ethics, in terms of data ethics, of course, and at the same time, we do not hide that we are from Accenture, and working with a strong editorial team in order to make sure that the messages are crafted in a way that the audience can actually absorb and recognize. And that's why we have to differentiate our messages per type of thought leadership, as Jill was indicating. There is a visionary side, a visionary type of thought leadership, and there is the more in the now, as Jill was saying, on one end. And on the other end, we've got to really tailor the messages to a specific audience that we have. And as we work in the B2B space, that means that we have to craft the messages according to the different function leads that we are going to address. And it's all about creating a continuous conversation with these different function leads. It's not about sending something over the fence, once upon a time and hope for the best. It is really about the way we can create that continuous conversation, get the feedback in the process so that we can take that on board as we elaborate the next steps of our programs.
That's such an important, this actually begs a different sort of question for me, Jill, which is how do you orchestrate all of this? This is a daunting effort to figure out how you take this to market. The hugely thoughtful approach is one thing, but then you are charged with taking this to a vast audience of a whole bunch of different segments, industries, decision makers, people. How do you think about that? And operationally, how do you navigate your team around that sort of thing?
So there's two parts of it. The first is the editorial planning that Frances was mentioning. And that is, you have to commit to an editorial voice and an editorial plan, but you also have to remain flexible. Sometimes research timing is different than you might have thought, or the market is ripe for one concept versus another. And so you want to be able to kind of have that nice balance of planning and flexibility and agility. And then the operational side, it's more complex than I would have ever imagined. It's really about fielding the right team. And it's not just in the research team and the brand team, it's across marketing. We need the expertise across industry, all of our markets and languages, and what is going to be the cadence, what pieces are needed first, what geographies, what industries, where is the translation process going? And we hold ourselves accountable to what really qualifies as launching the piece. If the piece is really important in certain markets and it hasn't yet been translated, okay, then adjust to that and make sure that that's ready and that's the way what you're committing to. So it is an orchestration without a doubt. And I think we have a process where we meet very regularly, probably even more than Frances appreciates, but we're constantly looking at that calendar, looking at what teams we've got deployed where pieces are, And we remain committed, but we also are very open to moving pieces around if it's going to make the piece better or the launch better.
Well, especially the moving the pieces around. I anticipated this question that's now just coming through the chat, and I'm going to ask this as a follow-up to you, Jill. And Francis, please feel free to chime in if you want. But I know there's probably a lot of people watching today that have very limited resources. They don't have these arsenals of teams and research teams. So if you were going to try to distill what you were doing, maybe hearkening back to your agency days when you're fewer on the resource side, do you have any tips for people for where they could start for maybe a more distilled version of what it is that you do at Accenture?
100%. Do less. Do a few things really, really well. And even at Accenture, where we do have big teams and we can produce more content, you would be surprised at the lifespan of a really, really good piece. Mm-hmm. So take your time, do it well, do it right. And then think of what are your chapters? What are your different angles? What are your different marketing opportunities with this research hypothesis, this thought leadership outline? There's so much to be milked from that. And just the other day, I was looking at some results from the team, and I questioned a piece that was still pulling these crazy strong results. And I pinged back. I said, could you check this? Is this still really one of our top performers? So don't pressure yourself for the volume game. Quality will win every time, and let yourself see all of the stories. You can tell all of the ways you could break that up into bite-sized pieces and continue to, nourish your audience with it.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I want to talk about the quality thing. So, Francis, it sounded like you had something to add to that, so I'm going to let you go there because I wanted.
Just a quick illustration of what Jill was saying related to COVID-19, because we all been into that since at least the beginning of March, and the temptation was very high to publish point of views related to COVID-19 on everything, and we decided to get a very disciplined way of acting, really putting the emphasis on value versus volume. So it does not mean that we have not been producing a fair amount of volume, of course, but it could have been a lot more. And we've been trying to be as disciplined as we could in order to really put the emphasis on value and bring something on COVID-19 to our clients where we genuinely thought we had something different and unique to bring to our clients. And when there was already something out there, which was done by somebody else, but which was, good enough compared to what we could do, just don't do it.
Yeah, I think the don't do it thing, and sometimes the do less is such a counterintuitive thing to most marketers, because we think more. We've just got to pepper the market with stuff, and editorial precision, I think, is a great takeaway from this. But one of the questions that has come up, and something I for sure want to get to, is when we talk about quality, understanding how do you, either from a quantitative or a qualitative perspective, measure what you think to be high quality content? Are there yardsticks that you use? I'll start with you, Francis, because I think you're probably closest to this problem, and then Jill, I want to understand the brand version of this. But yeah. What are the yardsticks you use to say this is a high quality piece of content? And then how do you measure its, the second half of that is how you measure its impact on the company, which maybe is a separate discussion. But
yeah, it's two sides of the same coin, but still two sides. I agree with you. In terms of measuring the quality as we produce the thought leadership first, we've got a battery of criteria, of course, and reviewing them one by one. And without going through all the long list of them, I would say that we can distill it to 3 dimensions. The first one is about differentiating idea, whether it is pioneering or not. If it's not, then go back to a drawing board. The second point is about, is it really relevant to a targeted audience? And I come back to that, what I was mentioning earlier. We've got a very specific targeted audience in our company. And then we can bring clients in order to help us to actually review whether it is meaningful to them or not. And the third thing is about getting into actionable recommendation and having something specific to advise our clients to do. Not something generic, but something which is really related to the issue that we are tackling. And that's really at this level, the main criteria that we're using. Of course, then at a different level below that, you've got the usual technical review about the quantitative side, the qualitative side, and so on and so forth. And there has been lots of changes, as in any research team, with the rise of AI, the rise of big data. But in terms of a production of thought leadership, that's really the main three criteria that I listed. That's for the internal side of it. Then if we go to the impact, if you want later, it's a different set of criteria, of course.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll have Jill chime in on the internal side of things. We'll go back to the external side of things because I think that's an important and pressing question. So Jill, what do you think about the determining quality from the perspective of the internal production of thought leadership?
Yep. So the process that Francis just went through, the idea, the relevancy, and the action. Can you see a client taking positive action, is definitely a starting point. The other part of it that we do, and we're constructed specifically to this, is we then interrogate it. We are very fortunate that we have really smart subject matter experts, and everybody comes together and we really dive into it. What is that hypothesis? What was the research methodology? What is that, provocative pioneering idea? Challenge it, add to it. And when I say interrogate it, I don't mean that in a harsh way. It's helpful and it's a very generous process, but you really have robust conversations on it. We do it regularly as a matter of practice. And going back to the prior comment, you can do this with a smaller team as well. But for anybody who's ever prepared a presentation and you've had a tough person to get through and you're like, oh, they keep asking me so many questions. When you go to make that presentation, you're better because they asked you all the hard questions already and you probably made adjustments. It could be just in your presentation style or it could be in the content itself. That process is very valuable. So when Francis's team does their work well, we then come in, business experts, marketing experts, research experts, and we all have a good, robust conversation about it. And I think everybody's inspired by that. We all then also have shared ownership and attachment to the piece that's coming out. And that's something that I really love watching happen. And I think it's a practice that is easy to adopt no matter what situation you're in.
Amazing. Okay. I have, boy, that prompted so many questions, but I'm going to ask those next. Okay. From an external perspective, how do you then justify, Francis, to the company that this continues to be a good investment for Accenture to make? Are there specific metrics that you're tracking? Are there figures that you can take to your boss and say, this is what proves that this was a good use of our time and energy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And don't get us wrong. We've got these type of questions all the time, all the time. And I would say that there are three different sets of things we look at. The impact on brand, and that is measured from different surveys, of course. The impact on media, we look at our share of voice, of course, by different type of media around the world. And then there is the impact on business more specifically, and that's about the number of client meetings which have been originated thanks to our thought leadership, for instance. And then you've got, the conferences, the keynote speeches, the publication in tier 1 business reviews, the bylines which have been accepted or not accepted, and so on and so forth. So that's really the second dimension, which is really tied to the development of a business. And then there is a third dimension, which is to look at neutral third-party reviews. So we look at all the third-party rankings which are available out there and understand what matters according to these neutral third-party rankings and what we should improve in order to progress in these rankings. Because it's important as we get the view outside in that we've got this neutral view in order to show to our management that it's not only our own bias to it. It's really something that is comprehensive enough to be convincing to the leadership of the company.
Right, that objective third-party perspective that's so critical to credibility. Jill, do you share those same metrics, or are there ones that are unique to the brand for Accenture that you look at as well?
Yeah, so Francis is a good partner in what we measure for brand, and we do measure that regularly. There's also media engagement. So when we have messages out there, what's really pulling people in, what's making them stay. And then there's also the side that I can't believe Francis didn't mention because I know he's so passionate about it. There's our internal feedback loop. And that's one of the things that's harder when you're a larger company. But you do hear when a client's particularly called. We have very good leadership who share the most important pieces, and they're very good at giving us feedback and say the client really, attached to this. They gave great feedback on it. This was very helpful to them. But the more we get that feedback loop and really find out what really helped start an important conversation, what helped answer an important question that a client had, that's a very important input point for us as well. And we're looking to operationalize that even further than we have. But that human feedback loop, in addition to all the data, is very important as well.
I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think it is something people overlook in pursuit sometimes of the hard numbers on the spreadsheet, is that qualitative feedback you're getting from especially people in the field who are working with clients. Like, was this useful to you? Did this have an impact on your work?
Every time we write the next generation plan, and I forget that, Frances adds it back in.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of these conversations in your offices. Sometimes, feel free to invite me over. So I think, kind of sticking with this theme of quality-ish, one of the questions that this evoked for me was, how do you know, have you gotten to a point where you've been sort of down the runway on something and then pulled the plug because you didn't think it was the right fit, or there was something that told you this wasn't meeting muster? And how do you know when that happens? Like, Frances, have you had an experience where there's been nope, this isn't going to work for us, and what happened?
Yeah, well, we get that. We get that. And I think the beauty of today's world, and especially social media and especially LinkedIn, is that you can measure very rapidly if something that you have produced is meeting its audience and having an impact or not. And then we can take the decision and unplug the thing. And of course it happens. It's not the majority of them, fortunately, because we test them enough in advance to have a good probability of success when we get into the full publications. But it happens from time to time, and in this case, that's what we do.
Jill, I'm assuming that from the perspective of your role, you have to also not just demand a lot from your own thought leadership, but you're probably always looking out in the market at what other people are doing and producing from a brand perspective. Can you speak to some of the mistakes that you see? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, so we can be anonymous here, but just in general, I think a lot of the companies we work with are always looking to avoid missteps. So are there ways you can encapsulate some of the mistakes you see people make with thought leadership so they can maybe avoid those?
I think, first of all, in our category, we have a very impressive peer set. So definitely looking amongst our peers tends to be more admiration and respect. But yeah, I think really the biggest thing you see in our category and outside is loss of perspective. Mm-hmm. And that's why that interrogation process that I mentioned matters so much. We also work, having that magic triangle, as Frances said, is helpful because, I was thinking of your last question, and there was one piece that we were really struggling with, and it was done by a fantastic research team within Frances's organization. We were struggling with the story of it. And it was by having that honest conversation that we were able to say, actually, the most interesting part of what, in defense of the piece, the researcher gave us a massive aha moment. And we were like, well, that's what we were missing. And it's varied. So we reconstructed. So I think sometimes it's the fact that you got the train on the tracks and you're producing and the perspective gets lost. So it doesn't tend to be anything that's any big thing, but you're like, oh, it was kind of there. And you imagine it could have been this bigger deal had you taken the time to maybe push back, rethink, reorient. So I think the biggest thing is don't lose the outside in perspective. Don't question yourself just for a deadline. Very often we'll say, why is that deadline so important? Yeah. And sometimes there is a moment in time, an event or a meeting that you have to have that done. But if you have more time and you don't think it's great yet, keep working it.
That's great advice. Great advice. Hey, Frances, one of the things that we talked about in the research was the importance of subject matter experts and leveraging the expertise in your company. And obviously at Accenture, I'm sure you have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to smart people. But one of the things I see people do is assume that all of the thought leadership, quote unquote, perspectives have to come from the C-suite. So how do you think about tapping into the expertise you have as an organization to help drive some of what you're working on, whether it's either informing the research up front or actually producing it? How do you leverage the people in your organization that are smart?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's in the organization and outside as well, because there are an incredible number of experts out there who are ready to contribute to thought leadership. So for us, it's all a matter to bring them in at a time where we've got a solid series of hypotheses and a solid research approach. The risk being that if you aggregate opinion of experts and opinion of experts, you may end up with opinions of experts, which is not really necessarily being a great thought leadership, right? So the point is just to squeeze that in at the right time, and then it can be extraordinarily powerful, especially to review the hypothesis and to test the relevance of them. In the way we position the thought leadership in the market, we've got what we call the P cycle of successful business ideas. And we try to position our thought leadership at the start of a cycle of what we call the project, which is not really a program yet. And the meaning of it being that if you've got a project, that means that somewhere in the world, you've got already business leaders working with the hypothesis you are formulating. There is a pilot somewhere that is making your hypothesis tangible. And it's important to leverage that, but there is not yet at the program level, because what is happening is not yet known by everybody, is not yet at the stage where you can replicate that innovation around the world very easily. So the role of thought leadership is going to help lots of business leaders to go from that project to that program stage. And that's the sweet spot for our own thought leadership. And that's where we love bringing in the experts, because they can help us identify whether the tangible investment that is behind the hypothesis is already out there somewhere or is not. And it's extraordinarily helpful.
I think that's an incredibly important process for people to think about, is even in their own thought leadership, is having a hypothesis around what they're trying to put out into the world, which is something we as marketers, I think, could borrow from the world of research in a way that we don't always. Jill, did you have something to chime in on that one? I thought I saw you take a breath.
The hypothesis part, first of all, Amber, is my favorite part. When Francis and his team are putting when we just had a meeting this morning on one, actually, and it's fascinating to me. The other thing around the role of experts is when a piece of research is done, there are and you're right, we do have an embarrassment of riches in this space, but it's really interesting to watch how different leaders with different perspectives create what we call on-ramps to the research. The additional context they'll give of why looking at this is important. And that might be something they're doing in social media. It might be something they're doing for a bespoke client or a meeting or a moment in time, but they kind of provide that entry point in and set up the research through a specific lens that then colors everything you see from there on. So it's another great way to use experts throughout the company with a bespoke piece of content.
Oh, that's so smart. Because there are so many people who can inform, even if they're not necessarily directly part of developing the research itself, right? I mean, there's so many thought starters, I think, available there. By the way, I want to remind you guys, if you're watching on the live stream, we're getting to the point where I'm going to pepper them with questions from all of you. And I've been threading a few in throughout, but if you have questions for us, please put them in the Q&A section over there so I can pull them in and make sure that I get perspectives for you. And one of the first that kind of popped up that caught my attention, we've been talking a lot theoretically, a lot strategically, but inevitably I get asked very tactical questions. And so I want to pose a couple of tactical questions. Have you found particular sweet spots for thought leadership, either at Accenture or in your opinion overall, about formats? Do you think about format or the types of media you produce, and how does that factor into your decisions about what to produce, or are there lots of them? So Jill, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, very much so. And it really does differ based on the subject matter and sometimes the industry or the part of the world. There's just different preferences. But when you can afford to do so, options are best. So a couple of things, I think length. So kind of the short, medium, and long form. The ability to consume right in platform not have to take a next click, a next action, a next download, and then always offering the video or audio option. People, we all know, learn differently. People just hear, but like to take in content differently. So when you can do that, it does not necessarily, in my experience, yet translate into there is one format that's always going to be a winner. I think it is very, very, very content dependent.
Frances, do you have a perspective on that? Do you think about formats when you guys are formulating the research or the hypotheses? Are you thinking about the mode of this content at all, or is that divorced from what it is that you're creating?
No, it's from the very beginning. To borrow on your analogy of divorce, Jill and I are married together in that business, and we work really together from the very beginning, and we embed the different type of formats from the very beginning, because that's the only way to be successful eventually on that, and that's exactly what Jill was saying, and we can see that there is more and more channels out there. It's in most cases it's not an or, it's an and that means that we've got to factor that in from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I think for most content creators, I think that can be some of the daunting aspects. Like, we have a question here that this is a fun one for both of you. We've got someone who's got a LinkedIn article that's getting good engagement for them. So if you're the head of research for Accenture, but you write some of this stuff on your own, what would you do with that article next? If it's performing well for you, would you use that in some way to seed something bigger? I'd love to hear your perspective.
It all depends on the business in which this person is and what are the business objective of his or her company. Because the way we position it all the time is that we are not an independent think tank. We are not a university department. We are part of Accenture, and that means for every single message that we're going to disseminate out there on the channel is got to be in line with the strategy of a business. So not knowing the specifics of this one, that's what I would say. I don't think there is a kind of general answer to it. It's got to really to be specific to the strategy of a company and its current objective and strength.
Well, Jill, that actually evokes something for me when we think about the concept of being agnostic from a brand perspective. When you're producing thought leadership from a company, we aren't agnostic. We like to talk about the fact that we are, or try to be, because we want to deliver value first. But how do you balance that aspect of being the Accenture brand and making sure that that's driving your strategy, but also making sure that what you're putting out into the universe is something that is universally valuable? Do you think about that when you're building these programs?
I think it goes to credentials. Are you credentialized to be talking about that subject matter? And it goes back to what Frances said at the very beginning. Are we delivering value for our clients? Are we helping them? So, I could write all day about a cake I baked yesterday. I'm not necessarily credentialed as a baker. But
I'm sure not credentialed as a baker.
But where I can bring value, I always go to a food story, right, Frances? There's always got to be a food angle to me. But where you are credentialed and you can bring value, bring that value. And that does tend to be also where your business can bring value to your clients. So there is alignment there. But I do think asking yourself a question of, it goes back to, do we have a right to be bringing this forward? And it does go back to research design and data. And very often, do you have an owned experience? It's a little bit of a connection to that LinkedIn post. Was there something about that LinkedIn post that person was uniquely suited to talk about, that actually is a key to an angle or a version of their expertise that the market is hungry for? And how they spin that out further?
We're entering into whatever the post-normal world looks like. Everybody keeps talking about returning to normal. I don't know if there is a normal anymore. I'm not even sure how to think about that. So as you're contemplating what's next for the Accenture business and how you think about thought leadership, Frances, is this changing your perspective at all about how you are working or what you're thinking about building? Or is it sort of business as usual for you, or somewhere in between?
No, it's not somewhere in between. It has completely changed, and that's really exciting. I think at least that's the way we take it right now. It has completely changed. I think first of all, in terms of the acceleration of the pace at which we have to collect data, we have to develop insights, compared to the previous era. So that's the first thing, and that means that everything we do in terms of thought leadership has got to be underpinned by a proper data infrastructure, which is able to produce data in a permanent flow. And that's not something that necessarily all companies had prior to COVID-19, and that, as we look forward, is, in our view, something that we all need to have, of course, with infrastructure in the cloud. So that's the first thing. Is that our CTO is saying, 3 years of change in 3 months. That's about what we feel on our side as well. And I would say, in terms of transformation, there are at least 3 transformations that we are experiencing now. The first one is that most of the models which were built prior to COVID-19 are broken. And that means that, the way of phrasing it is hello scenarios and goodbye linear trends. And that means that we've got a revival of scenarios with a feedback loop, which is a lot faster than it was before, but clearly an area to investigate now is the different scenarios that we can provide to clients, and the thought leadership that we can build with scenarios. The second change is a colleague of mine, Mark Curtis, is saying that we all into a health business these days. And my take on it is that all researchers are health researchers these days. And it's actually quite profound as a change, because at Accenture we work at the intersection of business and technologies, and all our researchers are quite knowledgeable on technologies. And guess what? Now we ask them to bring in this health dimension on top of it, not only in the health sector, but in all the industries that we cover. And that's going to be a profound change in the way we're going to address topics in the future. And the last one is exactly what we're experiencing today, is online collaboration. I think what we have proven in our company and in many companies in the past 4 months is that we can be extraordinarily productive working online. Now, the next challenge is, how can we be creative? How can we be creative online? And it's an interesting challenge for us, for lots of companies. If we put the hypothesis that the current situation is in somehow different formats, but going to stay as it is for some time, we have to get into this more creative mode online. And that means that we have to create deeper connections as well online. And if you push a little bit further, it is about how you can get into more empathy, how you can get into more authentic personal relationship online. And I've seen the blog that you have written, Amber, on LinkedIn recently on that, and I totally agree with that. It requires to be a lot more engaged, a lot more passionate, and build a really deep personal relationship online. And not all of us were ready to do that before COVID-19. We have to do that going forward if we want to get into this collective online creativity.
That's such an uncomfortable place for so many businesses and brands, isn't it? To incorporate that very squishy human element into our brands. Like, Jill, is there something about that transformation that you're thinking about the Accenture brand, which is something that in many ways is very, suit and tie, right? I mean, historically, something that is centered on a consultancy is a lot about the academic and intellectual side of things. How do you infuse that humanity and empathy into a brand that is big, well-known, and now entering into this kind of post-COVID era?
Yeah, it's remarkably easy because culturally we're a people company. We are all about our people. We're all about all the dimensions of our people, all the backgrounds, all the expertises, all the experiences. It's truly the way we work. It's a very accessible culture. So I think that that is something that I hope is showing up in our thought leadership, and is one of the things that I think when you become more comfortable and you really embrace thought leadership and content, a part of your brand, your true company's personality needs to stand out. And we do have a little bit more fun, I think, recently with the way we treat our thought leadership content. The subject matter is robust and rigorously researched, of course, but we have some fun with how we position it out there, and the way we treat it and brand it and share it, and the conversations we have around it, the way our subject matter experts champion it and talk about it in a really human and personal way. So I think that, even when you are a big company and you have an important perspective, how you invite people to hear that story, to interact with it, and what you look like should still be inviting, and it should still be very warm.
I love that. Like I said, I think that's hard territory for a lot of companies right now, trying to balance the voice that they bring to the table or the personality that they bring to the table. So,
well, you know what? It's that old white paper.
Yeah.
That's a terrible moniker.
Right.
In every way. So be anything but that. Be the voices of the people who are bringing an idea forward. Be the culture of your company that is credentialed in this space. Be the brand that you are. So I think if you could shake off that feeling that rigor equals boring, and then you're going to actually bring content to people in a way they're going to enjoy interacting with. To your point about formats, that they're going to enjoy interacting with it more.
Yeah, Francis, does that figure into the way that you think about, themes and topics and ideas for creating? I mean, obviously you have a wealth of resources to come up with ideas, but how would you recommend brands that are a little bit, trepidatious to tackle this thing? How would you guide them to think about ways that they can lean into topics and themes and ideas for their thought leadership content that would resonate in the world today?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question, and I'm obviously very happy to take question offline on that because I don't think there is a kind of general answer to this one, as it's got to be, as we speak about being authentic, it's got to resonate with the positioning of the brand, as Jill was mentioning, and there are things that we can do, things that we should not do, and make sure that we are in line with that. The fact that you have a dog, I've got a child screaming out there, that's part of it. That's not a big issue. Of course, the point about the way to get personal, of course, has got to be in line with the way we position the company.
Okay, well, we're getting to the point in the program where I'm going to have to shut up, and we're all going to have to shut up. And I think we could probably all talk about this for days. So I want to give us one last kind of opportunity to wrap this all in a bow. Jill, tell me if there's one thing you can leave our audience with today about most of them, I think, are probably looking at their own thought leadership strategy a little bit differently, thanks to this conversation. So what would you have them sort of take away and do tomorrow that can have the biggest impact on their ability to be a thought leader in their industry?
I think it would be three things. I'll start with the do less again, because I think it will just keep you focused. The second thing will be true to yourself. What is your passion? Where do you have that unique idea that is pioneering? And then bring it forward in a way you would bring any other subject you are passionate about forward, with humanity, with humor, with generosity. It does not have to be stiff or stuffy, even if the subject matter is complex. Be thoughtful and helpful when you bring it forward.
I love that. All right, same question to you, Francis. If you had something to give somebody as like a guiding principle out of this discussion and moving forward, what would you tell the brands and people that are watching today?
Well, my own take of it is be confident that there is a great future for thought leadership and thought leaders in the coming years. We have to rebuild lots of dimensions of society, lots of dimension of businesses, lots of dimension in the way that collaboration between companies are structured, collaboration between individuals and companies are structured. So there is a lot to do out there, and so I think they should be confident that they can find an exciting role in it.
I love this. Okay. I'm going to have to be forced to close out the show here. But before I go, Jill, is there anywhere that people can find you doing your own thought leadership online? Do you have any social handles people can follow you on? Stuff? Should we find you on LinkedIn?
Of course, without a doubt. Always. And yeah, I'm always more focused on other people's than my own, the typical thing. But yes, absolutely. LinkedIn is a perfect spot.
Great. And Francis, how about you? You got anything interesting coming out that we should be watching for?
Well, likewise, I contribute to LinkedIn on a regular basis, so very happy to meet people out there.
Outstanding. Well, I didn't pay you to plug LinkedIn, but I mean, hey, I'll take it if I can get it. Listen, Jill, Francis, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I could talk about this with both of you for hours on end because it's a topic near and dear to my heart, but thank you for taking time to join us here today. Everybody who's watching, I hope you'll both connect with Jill and Francis online, and I hope that you will come back and join us in August when we are going to do the next event in this series called Evolve Your Strategy, which is looking at some of the mega trends that are influencing business today. We've got a great panel of experts from our own B2B Institute here at LinkedIn, and they're going to be talking about some of the macro trends you need to be paying attention to as you evolve your strategy in the future. So I'm looking forward to seeing you next month. Thank you again for all of your time today and taking time out of your day to be with us, and we will see you on August 26th.